Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the resignation of Dame Lal Goddard is the latest in a long line of setbacks for the independent inquiry into child sex abuse. In her statement, the New Zealand judge said the inquiry legacy of failure had been very hard to shake off. The first chair, Baroness Butler-Sloss, had been appointed in July 2014, but she stood down just a week later. Dame Fiona Woolf succeeded her the following September, but resigned less than 2 months later. They'd both been criticised for being too close to the establishment. Finally, Justice Lal Goddard took over the role in February 2015, but she resigned yesterday. We can talk now with Gabrielle Shaw, who is the Chief Executive of NAPAC, an organisation that supports victims of child abuse. And Myri Pryor is a barrister specialising in sexual abuse cases. Thank you both for joining us. First of all, Gabrielle, how difficult is this for survivors of abuse to see a third judge stand down?
I think it's very difficult indeed, and let's not underestimate just how difficult it is for survivors in the first place to talk about what happened to them and to come forward. And for so long, so many years, they weren't believed and treated quite badly. So when the inquiry was set up in the first place, that was really good. It was an acknowledgement that this had happened, an acknowledgement that they had suffered at the hands of the state and that something was being done about it. Now, as you said in introduction, two judges were considered too close to the establishment, and that's because the voices of survivors spoke up in protest against it. And then we thought we had third time lucky, struck it lucky with someone.
And survivors were happy with?
Absolutely. Someone had gone to the other side of the world to find someone who had no establishment links. And moreover, someone who really put survivors and victims at the heart of the inquiry. She was so adamant about that, setting up a victim and survivors consultative panel, making sure survivors were at the heart of this. And now for her to resign, I think has caused, and we've seen it already on Twitter, on other social media, a lot of upset, a lot of pain and a lot of disquiet.
Mary, is it clear why she went? It was a very brief resignation statement.
It isn't clear at all. The resignation statement was 2 lines, and it simply said, "I'm resigning and I hope you accept this resignation." And whilst it's perfectly acceptable to resign in that way, I don't think it will assist survivors of childhood abuse to understand precisely why this lady who had made progress decided to leave the inquiry at this stage.
And presumably it's going to hinder the process, Mary.
What the people who are still within the inquiry are desperate to tell us all is that the work is ongoing, and that although they can't tell us about it, we should all understand that the work will continue in the absence of the chair. But the purpose behind the chair, effectively, it is to drive it and to ensure that all people can be heard. And there will be, no doubt, a delay whilst someone else is put in post and whilst that person gets up to speed with what has happened already.
I think you make a good point, but let's not forget the infrastructure behind the inquiry. It is massive, as befits something that needs to look at over 13 strands of life in the UK where this abuse took place. So it's not down just to one person that the inquiry will stand and fall. There's been a massive infrastructure, a big investment into very skilled people who are dedicated to making this go forward. And I think that's the message that we need that reassurance. I think we need it from the Home Secretary, which she's already given in her response, but also from the Prime Minister, who actually set up the inquiry in the first place, and who's so committed to making this happen for victims and survivors. But I think that reassurance would be absolutely essential to calm down a very agitated situation.
We've also had figures released today by the Office of National Statistics about the extent, the full extent of sexual abuse in this country. Let's talk a little bit about those figures and whether you think they reflect what's really going on out there?
Oh, absolutely. It was so good to have this question included for the first time in the surveys being done. If anything, from NAPAC's experience, it's an underestimate. And I say that because...
What are the figures? What are they saying?
They're saying that 11% of people have experienced some form of sexual abuse in childhood as a minor, particularly focused on rape and penetration. And we know from the helpline, telephone support line that NAPAC offers, that it takes years for survivors to actually report what happened to them, because it's so traumatic, the experience, and then having to think about it, having to talk about it, it re-traumatises it. So we think there's a lag time of around 15 to 20 years before you can actually pick up the phone or seek out some support. But what it, I think, demonstrates is the prevalence of sexual abuse in this country is far wider than I think people want to realise. And it's true, no one wants to think about a society where the assault of children takes place, but it does happen. And only by really addressing it head on, by things like this inquiry and others, can we protect children of the future.
Mary, for a long time now in this country, the justice system has been criticised for the way it's dealt with people who are survivors of sexual abuse, often looking at their lifestyle, criticising them. How important is it that that system improves in light of these figures we're hearing?
I think the system's improved dramatically over the last 10 years. If you go back 10 years, 20 years, or even further, the way that victims of child abuse, whether they came forward as children or as adult survivors, were dealt with, left an enormous amount to be desired. That is not to suggest it's perfect now, but there are now specially dedicated teams who deal with children and adult survivors. We now have counselling systems in place. There are independent support assistants who help people to go through the court process, and there are especially trained lawyers and judges who now deal with these cases.
And I know that you've worked with so many people through the system. What does it do for a survivor of sexual abuse when they see justice served?
It takes a lump of concrete from their heart and lifts it. I don't think, unless you've worked with survivors of sexual abuse, that you have any clear understanding of the enormous pain and suffering that they go through, not only while it happens, but throughout their lives, because they feel less than. And often, you know, as sad as it is, they did tell. They were not believed, either because they were in a care institution or because the person they were complaining about was someone famous or a member of the church or a professional in some way, or within their own home. Often people are not believed. And so they've lived not only with a legacy of sexual abuse, but with a legacy of being disbelieved when they had the courage to tell. And it has enormous impact on people. And I've seen over the years people have the courage, and it does take enormous courage, to come forward, to have their say, to be cross-examined in a courtroom, and to have 12 members of the public say, I believe you, I know that you're telling the truth. And you can see the difference. It is dramatic.
I totally agree with that. Sorry to interrupt, but I absolutely agree. That's a great way of describing it. And just to build on that point, likewise, what we see in this country is a lack of support for the ongoing support of survivors that's needed. So once they go through the criminal justice system, and not all survivors do, I mean, you'll know this as well as I do, that it's not the case for all survivors that they can actually get that justice that they want and they deserve, either because the case isn't brought forward or the perpetrator is dead, or for whatever reason. So the ongoing support they need to rebuild their lives and to deal with the problems that come forward is absolutely necessary, and there's a lack of that support. Charities such as NAPAC and Survivors Trust and others, local charities that do such great work are there, but there's a real lack of the complete support that's needed for survivors.
Gabrielle, Mary, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us.